So my name is Pete Rizzarello, and my dad is Frank Rizzarello. He is Pete's uncle. Pete is I'm one of his many cousins, and my dad was asked to say a few words today, and he opted to put his words down in writing, courtesy of my brother Frank, who wrote the words out for him, and I'm going to read them for him today. Thank you. When Robin asked me to say a few words about Pete today, I was happy to do it. While I like to talk, I've never really been much for giving speeches. But when someone honors you with a chance like this, you just can't say no. To put it simply, Pete was a great person, and I consider myself blessed to have known him. Watching him grow up was fun, but seeing the man he became made me so proud. Pete, like all of my nieces and nephews, worked hard, loved to laugh, eat, and had a strong love for his family and friends. That is a value that my brothers and sisters instilled in their children, and as one of the oldest, Pete learned these lessons early. He was the apple of my sister Mary's eye. As a truck driver who worked in the Detroit area, I often stopped by their house in Detroit to see Mary and Gus. Pete was always there, and I had many chances to witness their family life. One of my favorite stories about Pete took place when I was visiting the house one morning. Mary was in the kitchen cooking, and Pete came down for breakfast. At my age, the exact details are a bit fuzzy, but my sister was trying to get Pete to lose a few pounds. When he came in for breakfast, Pete was disappointed to find that his mother had only made him 6 eggs instead of the dozen that he normally ate each day. I remember an argument between them about his weight, and I found the whole thing very funny. Pete and I drove trucks for a living, and we were members of the Teamsters Union. Naturally, we had many conversations about the Teamsters over the years. While I am grateful to the union for helping me receive a decent salary and benefits to raise my family, the stories about its leadership are legendary, and I chose to do my job, pay my dues, and stay out of it. Pete, on the other hand, worried about the way the union was run and wanted to make things better. I can remember several conversations where I would tell him to be careful. I worried for his personal safety. If Pete was afraid, you would never have known it. My sister Mary was so proud of the way he stood up for what was right. I was too. And while many of you will remember a scary moment in Las Vegas years ago, Pete managed to survive all of the union stuff and live a pretty good life. In the end, the cancer caught up with him, but like he did throughout his life, he fought like hell, which is exactly what you'd expect from him. Overall, I would say Pete did a pretty good job of living. He worked hard, he loved a lot of people, and he remained true to himself, his family, and his friends throughout the years. I would call that a great success story. When my time comes, these are the measures by which I hope people will evaluate my time on this earth. I hope I score as high as Pete did.
I'm going to try to get through this. Pete never was a stranger to anyone. If you knew Pete, he was the most important person in your life. You were the most important person in his life. When he was with you, you were the only one. But the main thing that Pete was in his work with the union, with his friends, Pete was a teacher. No matter, you never knew you were being taught. But there's a saying that goes, when the student is ready, the teacher arrives. Pete was that's what he was about. He was a teacher. And I just want to thank Robin for putting this thing on and allowing us to all get together and share Pete's life and say that in his last days, I had the pleasure with Bill Hackett. We rode up and we visited Pete. And Robin, Amy, Richard, Jackson, they devoted their lives to him in the last days. And I remember saying to Robin that, Pete might not be able to stay in the house. He was so sick. It was such a hardship on that family. And she said no, she wasn't going to let him go to a hospice house. She was going to keep him right there, and that family was going to support him and take care of him, and right to the very end. That's what they did. And I want to thank all of the family and our family in Chicago, and tell you I love yous all, and we all love Pete.
So I'm not on the program, but my name is Ed Hegedus. If you don't know me, I was Pete's nephew. I just want to say a couple words about his influence on me and his other nephews. Joe and Jackson said he was kind of a silent teacher. He wasn't trying to teach you things, but he did. And especially, his three pretty shy nephews. I don't think I'd be up here today if it wasn't for the things that Uncle Pete taught me. Whether it was seeing a 300-plus pound man doing yoga in my living room, or some of the colorful outfits he had, or taking us traveling and things like that, showing us new places. That all kind of rubbed off on us, and seeing all the people here today. The variety of people and the sheer number of people, his friends and family that he really cared about. I'm thankful to say that, with his influence, I was able to build up a great network of friends and family. I know that he could always go anywhere in the country and have a couch to stay on. So I'm pretty thankful for that. So my family's making me cry now, so I'm going to go ahead and just say thank you. And that part of Uncle Pete is going to live on with me. So.
My name's John Mathis. I'm one of Uncle Pete's nephews. I want to start by thanking everyone for coming. Seeing how many people here is truly amazing, how many people my uncle touched. When I started thinking what to talk about, I started writing down some thoughts. And the first thing that always came to mind was the word love, which Uncle Pete did more than anything. And it actually drew me to a verse in Matthew where love is one of the greatest commandments. It's to love others as you love yourself. And that's what my Uncle Pete did. He loved everyone. He could disagree with you one minute, but the next minute he'd turn around and, like it was said before, he'd hand you the shirt off your back. And he did it all the time, no matter what. And there's so many great memories I have of him. If it's from him taking me, Eddie, and Ryan traveling to the East Coast, and the trips we took, and the stores he took us to. One store that I don't know why our parents let him take us on vacation, but from having great laughs and times to him making sure that my family, when my daughter was born, that we had a reliable car. And that was always his concern. He'd call in, it was, after, how are you doing? How's the car holding up? And he wanted to make sure that we got around, that we weren't going to have trouble. And he would do it no matter what. And it wasn't like, he pretty much gave us the last car, which I can't begin to thank him for in many ways. He was a father to me. When at times when my dad wasn't really in the picture, my uncle stepped to the plate and acted like a father figure. And I will always miss him. He's going to be a part of my memories forever, and just love telling the stories and amazement of the life he lived and how much he accomplished, and yet barely talked about it. It was just kind of something he did. And as I'm starting to cry, I'm going to also step aside. Once again, thank you, everyone, especially, like Eddie mentioned, Aunt Robin, Amy, Jackson, Richard, everything you guys did for him. I can't begin to thank you enough, and the respect and love for you guys has increased.
tough acts to follow. I'm honored to be speaking in front of all you guys today. Pete has made such an impact on my life in the short time that I've known him. Just like his nephew said, Pete was that father figure to me. I didn't bat an eye when Pete became ill and needed someone there to make sure that he got the best care possible. The late night phone calls, the early morning phone calls. You know, Pete was always concerning and was a genuine individual. He reminded me of myself. Pete had the tendency to bring the best out of everyone, and that's what he did for me. I was blessed when he offered me the opportunity to become a member of the family. And being a great teacher. You know, Pete was great to the end. You know, I was able to share a moment to actually cry with Pete to help him through his fight, because it was a tough road ahead and he didn't want to go through it alone. So I was glad I was able to be there with him for that. The sisters, the cousins, the uncles, the entire family. You know, Pete was just that great of a guy, and I can see the impact that he's made on everyone and what he's made on me. So thank you, guys. Thank you, Pete.
So I wouldn't be a part of Pete's family without a little bit of cursing at his memorial. So just FYI. I put my parents through hell and back as an adolescent. I guess that's partly why I love to work with and help others who need guidance and direction. When I was 15 years old, I started dating a guy who was really toxic. We moved in together, and my parents and step-parents all hit the roof, Pete included. Pete was such a great guy and parent. He taught me how to drive and then helped me get a car. My first car was a 1988 Toyota Corolla with tinted windows and the old square box shape. Pete was such a mechanical head, he made sure to have the vehicle inspected and in top shape for me to drive. I think I broke a little of his heart when I ran off with this asshole and took the car with me. Pete eventually stole the car back and hid it from me until I could get my shit together. He was tough, but I know he loved me and was looking out for my best interests. When I became older and more mature, Pete and I spoke about love, relationships, and how to express feeling while being vulnerable and healthy. When Pete met my husband, Richard, not only was he happy for me, but also he was happy there was this other guy who was sweet and kind and cared for others in our lives. And Pete loved my mom, no matter how crazy she got, about things like the laundry or taking the garbage out every day or having stacks of laundry detergent and toilet paper. He understood her well and said, "That's how she is, my wife." My parents didn't always get along, but Pete did. He got along with everyone. It was hard not to like him. He would give you the shirt off of his back, which he often did. Pete helped anyone he could, often paying a price as a result of this. One time, Pete hired a guy to do the shoveling and snow blowing. He said he felt the guy needed some work and seemed like a nice guy. Well, the guy took the snow blower and shovels and never returned. But Pete had no regrets. Not only did he help anyone he could, he loved life, including living life to its fullest. Pete loved Florida, and he loved to travel, and he always told me he lived a great life. He said the reason he retired early was because he worked so hard and wanted to enjoy his life. I hope I am fortunate enough to do the same. I'm sad he died so young, as he wasn't able to enjoy his retirement to the fullest. But I agree with his philosophy. Pete was the energy you breathe, the heart you feel. Pete lives on in all of us. I know, sorry. I know when I'm thinking about how pissed off I am at my employer, about the union, I hear Pete's voice. I hear his advice, I feel his charisma, his strength to fight on. Pete fought until the end. He loved until the end. Unconditionally, as he always did with all of us here. Let's remember that. Let's remember how his spirit lives on and what he would want all of us to keep doing. It wasn't by chance that Pete appeared in the New York Times and on YouTube, or remains inside all of us as the check-in. What are you guys doing? Carry it on, Pete. I hope you're somewhere peacefully enjoying the good life. I'll miss you.
Thank you. I'm Robin Potter, Pete's wife, and I'll try and cut it short. And the good thing about going last is everyone says a whole bunch of things that you would say. So anyway, I want to leave people with things that you could always keep with you. That's a gift from Pete, which many of you already have. In Hebrew, we have a word called tzedakah. Tzedakah is the Hebrew word for charity. And it doesn't mean charity like throwing a dog a bone. It means engaging in the struggle for social justice and righteousness and changing things. So Jewish people, we leave a lot of times a jar of coins in our houses, and when it fills up and people come in, and then we give it away to people who are poor or homeless, like Amy works with homeless vets, and that's what Pete did. It wasn't a question of charity for benevolence. It was a question of what he did to make change in the world. And that's what he was devoted to. And recently I went to the funeral of the husband of my good friend Kim Bobo from Interfaith Justice. And she said that she never thought she'd be organizing her own husband's funeral. And I didn't think I'd be in this situation, nor did Lorraine. But that's the club we were drafted into. That's where we are. We didn't want to be here, but we are. And so you see on these videos and all the pictures here, Pete smiling often, because that's who he was. And that was a gift maybe he'll leave us with, that he always said the glass was half full, not half empty. And he was born by the river here. And eventually we got together, and I'll just share that real briefly. We are a TDU marriage. I was the lawyer for TDU, along with Barbara, Paul Levy, Michael, Ann Thompson. And I know he stalked me for many years. I knew that. Ken knew that. Everyone knew that. And so finally he had decided one day when he thought I was single, because he watched me and saw I didn't have a ring, and he told me he was going to be coming to my room, and I said, no way. And so... Ken laughs because, of course, he was very determined when it came to women. So eventually we got together, and to my surprise, a lot of people would go to Niagara Falls or Paris or wherever, and their mates would propose to them. And imagine my surprise at a Labor Notes conference when Brother Mike Parker said, well, Pete, you're an international hero. Tell us something we don't know. And to my beet red face, he said, well, I'm going to marry Robin Potter. And I nearly strangled his ass at that time, but that's who he was, jokes and all that. And people talked about traveling, and there's a reason why Pete was always on the road organizing or going to marches. And I don't have it here, but that's because under the National Master Freight Agreement that Dennis and Ronnie and Jim and everyone went out on strike for, had a clause that at a certain amount of tenure, and I don't know if it was 10 years, 15, you got 5 weeks vacation. And imagine the boss's joy every time Pete left the barn and went on vacation. And it was a joy for the boss. But the lesson I think he taught us, and he was very smart. You couldn't hear the Labor Beat video, but maybe it's on YouTube. And he was smart, and the Smith guys all were of the same level of smartness, and they studied, and they knew their contract. And knowledge is power to Pete. And even though he was what the New York Times might be called a working-class hero, he studied, and he knew that contract. And all the guys at Smith knew that contract. Eddie was a steward. Pete was a steward, and he was very proud. I think he said he never lost a grievance. But there was one he was really uptight about, and I helped him with it. And that was, and he knew he was going to lose, and we had a real problem as the lawyers for TDU winning these drug cases. It was a big struggle because of DOT regs. And So this was I don't know who it was, it doesn't matter, I couldn't say anyway. And the brother had a little cocaine problem. But Pete, you know, he was very disciplined and he'd work everything out. And so he had the grievance worked out the best he could, but he didn't think he would win it. But he had the honor of being in the bathroom with the boss. And the boss had a cocaine problem. And so he heard the boss in the next stall, and I can't even repeat the words he told the boss, but the brother was back at work that day. And so, you know, you have to be smart and a thinker, and he was an amazing writer. And people thought working class people were stupid. And so that Pete, you know, really studied hard. He'd walk around with a little dictionary. I don't know, you know, people don't know some of this. And he would love, particularly at TDU conventions, he was the only man who did this, and it's something Amy, Jackson, and I have learned. He would go from table to table, and he'd say, brother, how you feeling? How's the kids? How's the wife? Are you still on unemployment? And invariably when he'd come home, I don't know how Ken did it, but there'd be all these debits in the checkbook. And he would be paying TDU, and he was paying people's mortgages who were on hard times and couldn't pay their mortgage. And he was buying people food, and he would go, and he had a friend who couldn't quite get it together to clean his house, and he'd go and clean his house, and when he moved to Portland, he packed his stuff up and shipped it. And I saw all that in the checkbook. So, you know, it's just who he was, to do justice. But more than that, here's some of the lessons he taught us. Listen. Just listen. Get organized. Stay organized. Take care of business. Pete planned his own, you know, funeral. He planned his own cremation. We didn't have to do much. We just made a few phone calls, and he would tell me, tell people when I die, take care of business so their families don't have to do it. And that's what I did. And he would say, a boost is a knock. Feelings just are. Give for the gift of giving. He would keep immaculate records. Our checkbooks balanced to the penny, even though it leaked a lot because he was helping so many causes and people. I want to come to the end and talk a little bit about his courage. And he would say when the disease struck him that he didn't know what was more painful, having the shit beat out of him by the Hoffa goons or struggling with renal cancer. And he decided in the end that the cancer was more painful. And in the end, it was immense courage that, you know, our family couldn't do it alone. And if not for Amy and Richard and Jackson and Joan staying over a few nights a week, Johnny, Eddie, Ryan, Melissa, Annie coming, staying at the house, cooking and cleaning, and his sisters, amazing sisters, coming and taking care of him. And when he couldn't walk, Richard carrying him up and down the steps, and Rose organizing teams to get him back and forth to the hospital. And Joe, and I knew at a certain point that Pete would not die. He would not die until Joe came. And he waited for Joe until Joe came. And then Joe and Bill came, and there was no question about what you had to do to take care of Pete. It didn't matter. You would give as he gave to you, to the point where the first night Joe was there, he slept 12 hours. And finally, Bill and I were so tired, we said, we got to wake that son of a gun up. We can't do any more of this. Pete died in part because the healthcare system in this country does not know how to heal cancer. It's a disease, it's a violent disease that eats away at you, and the medical industrial complex has no need to cure it at this point, either because of profit, whatever. And had he lived, he wanted to devote himself also to finding a cure, and we tried for the men and women at the University of Chicago who tried to save his life, and you'll see a statement from his oncologist back there. They tried like hell. But there's no unity between Eastern and Western medicine. And so when Pete begged them, take me off the chemo, take me off the radiation, but give me acupuncture, give me traditional Chinese medicine, and they wouldn't do both, because they didn't have anything developed in this country to do both. And so he went too soon, and he went before his time, and he went before there's a cure. And it was really violent that there was no cure. And I think Jackson or Amy or Richard mentioned Florida. That was his place in the sun. He loved being down there with Chris Curtis, with Ann Curtis, with Mike, God bless him. And he tried so hard to return, and you'll see a statement on the back table from his friend Dick Doran, an ex-FBI agent. Imagine that, a leftist and an ex-FBI agent being really good buddies, and they were. And he cried because he wanted to be with Dick, and he couldn't get down there. I couldn't get him on a plane. So I think it's really important to remember what he stood for, and Bill is right. If there was a march, if there was a question of oppression, of civil rights, he would be there, he would march. He taught us to stand up. There's a banner out there in the back that the Chicago Teachers Union, they just happened to make it with Pete's picture on it, because he was out there during the strike supporting Jackson. Amy and I were out there as well. He did things no other man would do, and it was kind of okay, kind of crazy. And I thought he had all these girlfriends down in Florida because, and my brother-in-law Keith can tell you, that he was going to water aerobics, because when they removed his kidney in July 2012, they told him he was cancer-free, but instead the cancer had been spreading, and they did no follow-up. And it was in his bone, and in his brain, and in his lungs, and his pelvis, and in his stomach. And it was a really, really brave man who could go through chemo, radiation, 2 gamma knives to the brain to take 3 tumors out of his brain. He was strong, and he was always strong, and it hurt like hell. But nevertheless, they told him to do work hardening because it was arthritis. So he went back down to Florida, and he worked so hard in so much pain. And he had these girlfriends, and they were in the Aqua Aerobics Club, and he was the only guy in the history of that place to be in the club. And I was a little jealous, but when I went down there and did Aqua, those women were jealous of me, like, what are you doing in the pool with our man? So I guess go against the grain, be kind, always give, and don't ever forget the struggle, because he believed not only in trade unions, but unions that were strong. And he was so proud, and he lived to see the CTU strike, and he was so proud that you could have a union, you could take power, you could be a democratic union, you could serve the people, and you could do things that, raise hell throughout this country to make real good change. So thank you all for coming, and please look at the back of the program, because none of this today would have been possible without Pete. And I kind of kept thinking to myself there, well, why don't we just ask Pete what he thinks? But then I remembered he's not here. So, really great things that happened here today are due to the people on the back as well who helped. So thank you all.